Cllr Henman, thanks for joining me this morning. Another beautiful day. We're here in the shade beside the Roasted Lemon Cafe, who very kindly set up the table here in the shade so I could have a chat with you. We were joking with climate change, it won't be long before lemon trees are probably growing here in Sydney Gardens.
Well, I think it's undeniable now that climate change is happening all around us. I mean, this year we're seeing unprecedented levels of heat throughout our area and across the whole country. I mean, only yesterday there were residents of Bath talking about the fact they could smell the wildfires in South Wales. And so we are facing a very different environment, and we do need to be doing our best both to try to reduce the impact of that change and also adapt our planting and our gardens to that changing environment.
Yeah, that's something I have been talking about on bathmuseum.com. I mean, there aren't many formal beds left in Bath. You've got Parade Gardens, of course, and that lovely little bed in the corner of the Royal Circus, the Royal Crescent rather. They all get out the coaches, take a shot of the flowers and then climb up to get a shot of the Royal Crescent. Do you think we might be seeing the end of that sort of formal floral display?
Well, I think a lot of it is to do with the timings throughout the year. I think we're going to see different approach to seasons. Clearly we have that early spring season where we do still benefit from fantastic displays of flowers, and I know that our parks team they actually grow a lot of those flowers from seed. They also then provide some of those flowering plants to neighbouring councils like Bradford-on-Avon. So I think there is still a place for that kind of early spring sort of colour. But I think when you get into the later summer, as we are now in the middle of August, then we need to look at things a bit differently. If we are looking at very dry periods over the main summer, then we need to think about resilient plants that will last in the drier environments that we're seeing, and certainly the kind of taller grasses and some of the more wildflower approach does seem to cope better. And of course tree planting is a key part of that. I mean, we can see that even here around us where you have tree cover, the grass actually survives much better than where it's in the open and it dries out. So having more tree cover I think is also crucial, both for the benefits it brings in absorbing carbon dioxide, but also increasingly in providing shade for other plants below.
Now, I brought you to Sydney Gardens because I wanted to talk about a specific thing, and that's Brunel's pedestrian bridge. To my understanding, it's the last one designed by the great Victorian engineer that still remains on his Great Western Railway. Now, Network Rail contractors have made a pretty good job, I think, of restoring it. It looks very smart. I was wondering whether there ought to be some sort of plaque, some sort of notice that explains why that particular bridge is so important. Now, I think discussions, and we have talked about this, and we've talked about it with the Friends of Sydney Gardens, and there was also the idea that maybe the plaque should go beside the railway line, where you could look up to that pedestrian bridge, but also have information about how Brunel planned the cutting through this former Georgian pleasure garden to actually look like the stage of a theatre. What do you think of the idea of some sort of physical recognition of the bridge and of Brunel?
Well, firstly to say it's very welcome, as you've highlighted, Richard, that GWR, the railways have actually restored that bridge so sympathetically. Clearly it's a key piece of architectural history, and it's really important that we do recognise that. We know there was some disruption to rail users, but I think the end result is a great result, and I agree with you that it's great to be able to celebrate that part of the history of Sydney Gardens. And so absolutely, I think we're looking now with the team, with the parks team, what's the best way to identify a space for some sort of notice about the bridge and explaining some of the history. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, as you know, there's a very clear set of boards around the temple up here, which is a sort of recreation of the temple that would have stood next to the baths in that sort of Roman style. There are other notice boards around Sydney Gardens, so I think it would be a welcome addition to highlight that that moment in its history when the railways came through, what, as you say, a Georgian pleasure garden. So I'm sure we can find a way to work with the Friends to develop that board.
Of course, there's also the question of who pays for it. It's my understanding that there might be some funds available from Network Rail, which I'm sure will add a little to the smile on your face. But that is something that has to be borne in mind.
Well, that's great to hear. I think we definitely are, facing tough economic times. So any opportunity for partnership with other authorities like Network Rail would be very welcome. So I think we'll definitely be looking at all options, and of course the role that the Friends of Sydney Gardens can play in partnership with the council.
Now, while we're talking parks, I'm going to whiz you over the city to Victoria Park, because the big announcement this morning was how far you guys have got with coming up with a solution to our dry duck ponds. I went up there yesterday, and by golly, they are certainly dry. Now, this is a joint operation, isn't it? The press release today doesn't mention Wessex Water, but I thought the whole idea was that you were working in tandem. So what's been happening in the past year?
Well, absolutely, Richard. I mean, as you know, there are a number of different factors that affect the situation with the Royal Victoria Ponds. One of those is that historically there were pipes connecting to some of the springs further up the hill near the golf course there, and the water was actually piped all the way down to the ponds, first to the Botanic Gardens and then down into the duck ponds, as you highlight. That original pipework, going back to sort of Georgian or early Victorian times, had been corroded and had been leaking into some of the neighbouring properties along the boundary of the park. So it was actually cut off several years ago. And what's been filling the pond, as you know, over the last 5 to 10 years has only been rainwater. And of course this year and last year we've had increasingly dry summers. And so the amount of water that collects in the ponds has been extremely limited, and we've seen this incredibly dry period. Now, that's not the only issue though. What we've also discovered, and for me this is something I've been following closely now for over a year, we've looked at, now that the pond is dry, we've been able to assess the state of the whole bottom of the pond and the liner, and we can confirm that some of that liner has degraded, and so that's also allowing the water to drift out, to leak out. So we are now in the process of identifying and agreeing a new contractor to actually clear out the pond, to put a new liner in so that we can retain the water. But crucially, we can't rely just on rainwater anymore, and this is why we've been working very hard with Wessex Water, you're absolutely right, to identify new water sources. And of course we're fortunate in Bath that we do have a number of springs nearby. There is a water source currently that some people may have seen that goes through the Great Dell, which is just behind the Botanic Gardens, and there is still water flowing there. It's not a huge flow, but it is a steady flow, and what we're doing at the moment is to assess all of the different water sources to identify where we can get the most water to come in. So the Great Dell is a promising one, but we probably would need additional additional springs to feed it as well. And so we're also looking again further up, nearer to where the golf course is, whether there are additional springs there, and that would require then new pipe work to come down to the Botanic Garden, so we reconnect the whole system as it was originally designed. So we are on track to restore it to how it would have originally been designed, but we crucially also want to think about how we can increase the biodiversity. So when we come to refilling the ponds, we'll also change the planting, bring in additional pond planting that can also increase the biodiversity within that pond environment. So that's what we're aiming for over this coming 6 months. We know it's taking time, and we appreciate that people would like to see faster work, but we have to work with the seasons. I mean, this is the reality that we're faced with a body of water like that. You do need significant supplies to be able to actually refill that whole body of water. And so we'll be working now to first reline the pond, and then to bring in those new water sources to actually fill it fully and restore it to its full potential.
Sounds expensive. Who's paying?
Well, at the moment, we have, within the budget, we have the first stage covered. The second and later stages, we are in discussions and we're looking at how we might do that. So I'm glad to say that Wessex Water have actually shared the cost of this initial feasibility, and all of this work that I mentioned in terms of monitoring the water flows, doing the topographical studies and so on. A lot of that has been shared with Wessex Water, so we've been grateful for that partnership. But the next stage is we'll have to then explore whether we might also partner with some of the residents groups, or potentially in the future lottery funding, to really restore all of the different planting. But I think we'll take it in stages. We'll do the relining and then we can look at the planting a bit later on.
Would it help to, there are basically 2 ponds, aren't there? So might it be a better idea to do them one at a time?
Well, they're sort of interconnected. So one part of it, you probably saw, one part of it has a solid base, a solid liner, which used to be the old, I think, boating pond. So that part would simply require refilling, and actually the base of it is pretty solid.
Is that the top one or the bottom one?
That's sort of to the right. It's the sort of the one that sort of comes out,
Yes.
where you have the promontory, and then you have 2 sides that come around the promontory, and those 2 sides would need to be done together because the water flows between those 2.
Yeah. Do you know, Victoria Park is the only park in Bath that doesn't have a Friends of?
Well, I think there are, as you probably know, there are a lot of residents who are very interested and very active, and I've been talking to many different residents recently, and we've been receiving a lot of email communication from a range of different residents. So it might be that there could be an opportunity there to work with the parks team. I know the parks team are always looking for volunteers, and they do already organise some volunteering opportunities within Royal Victoria Park. So there might be a way that residents could be more involved going forward.
What about a Friends of the Duck Ponds?
Well, who knows? I mean, that's could be an option. I think that would be something to explore with interested residents.
You are opening this up to a consultation.
So there'll be, first of all, the initial phase of relining, and we will then have a consultation in terms of what the planting looks like, what the environment around it looks like, to give people an idea of the kinds of ways that we could bring back biodiversity. So yes, that's what we'll then be consulting on.
Oli, I think it's great that we can sit and talk about this. There are a lot of people who go online and criticise, you know. We're a year down the line. In fact, I think they're organising another protest to mark the year since their last protest. But you are at least showing that during that year, things have been happening.
Absolutely.
And I think that's important to get that across.
Absolutely. There's been a lot of activity throughout this year, as I said, both in terms of rethinking the environment itself, looking at the water supplies, monitoring the water supplies, identifying how we then potentially pipe those back into the ponds. All of these things do take time, and they do require careful planning, because if we rush into things, people will then turn around and say, well, you're spending all this money but there isn't a long-term plan. So it's really important for us that we get the long-term planning right. We can then bring people with us as we go forward. But there has been significant activity, and there will be more activity within the coming weeks in terms of that relining process. So you'll be seeing that. I'm confident you'll be seeing that very soon.
Get it done before it rains.
Well, this is it, and actually this is one of the key points that you might be aware of, that now that it's dry actually is a very good time, as you say, to clear it out, to put a new liner in. Then when the rain comes, we can then refill it.
Getting a positive out of a negative. Oli, thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Always good to talk to you.